Previously, we uncovered how wars could exist entirely on paper, conflicts built from memos, reports, and headlines. It was a revelation born from the ashes of global conflict, a quiet understanding that the pen could be as final as the sword, but infinitely more sustainable. Now the illusion grows. The ledgers become empires. The ink bleeds across continents, not as a record of events, but as the event itself. By the late 1950s, both Freelandia and Arcadia had learned the same lesson. Wars that live on paper can outlast any army. The new soldier wore a tie and carried a briefcase. Their weapon was the rubber stamp, their ammunition triplicate forms. Bureaucracy became the battlefield. The real victories were no longer measured in territory gained, but in budgets approved and balance sheets expanded. An entire generation of civil servants was trained not just to administer the state, but to wage its silent, perpetual wars. A fictional document titled Arcadian Finance Directive 19F reads, "Expansion of administrative zones equals expansion of control. A new department is a new fortress. A new budget line is a new battalion." And so began the era of the paper empires. This was the foundational doctrine. Control was no longer about occupying land, but about occupying organizational charts. Power was the ability to generate paperwork faster than your rival could process it. In both capitals, departments multiplied with startling speed. Committees were formed, then split, then merged into new supercommittees, each one a labyrinth designed to justify its own existence. Each new office, no matter how obscure its purpose, required another round of funding, another annex, another legion of clerks. Reports thick as novels described progress and conflicts no citizen could verify, citing metrics that were utterly meaningless outside the halls of power. Quote from Freelandian Memorandum D24A, 1963, "Perceived escalation maintains morale and justifies resource allocation. Statistical warfare is preferable to physical loss as statistics can be revised." And so every statistic became a soldier, every chart a front line. The enemy was defined not by their actions, but by the space they occupied in a spreadsheet. Success was a rising line on a graph, a positive quarterly report from the Ministry of Strategic Narratives. The war effort was measured in reams of paper consumed and printer ink cartridges replaced. An internal Freelandian audit from 1968 noted, "The Office of Proactive Contingencies has exceeded its stationary budget by 400%. This is presented not as a failure of fiscal discipline, but as a leading indicator of operational tempo." Then, in the 1970s, the paper began to dematerialize. The illusion migrated from filing cabinets to magnetic tape, from ledgers to screens. Analysts, once surrounded by stacks of documents, now stared into the green and black void of glowing terminals, drafting battles in data instead of blood. The core principle remained, but the speed and scale were about to change forever. The press, hungry for information, printed what the terminals told them, unaware that the source was not intelligence but invention. One fictional briefing, Arcadia Information Bulletin 77C, boasted that entire narratives of victory or defeat could now be generated overnight. "Our algorithms create the perception of consistency," it said. Consistency is credibility. The public does not need truth. It needs a story that does not contradict itself from one day to the next. This was the birth of computational propaganda. The machine didn't just report the war, it was the war. It could simulate skirmishes, invent enemy movements, and generate casualty figures, all tailored to achieve a desired political outcome. In Freelandia, similar technology fed the birth of Project Ledger, a vast classified network linking every government ministry through encrypted, paperless communication. Officials nicknamed it the Invisible Front. Here, budgets expanded faster than facts, and policy was decided not by debate, but by the processing speed of their mainframe. The system was designed to be impenetrable, a closed loop where data created by the state was used to validate the state's own actions. Throughout the 1980s, the paper empires reached their zenith, now powered by silicon. Wars no longer needed smoke, they needed statistics. They didn't need soldiers, they needed data entry clerks. Each casualty number, each success ratio, each pixel of the nightly news reinforced the illusion that conflict was perpetual, and therefore funding was indispensable. The economies of both nations became addicted to the conflict, their GDP tied to the production of reports, the maintenance of databases, and the salaries of a million bureaucratic combatants. An Arcadian directive from this era, Media Engagement Protocol 4, outlined the new strategy. The goal is not to win the argument, but to flood the conversation. A confused public is a compliant public. We will measure success in column inches and broadcast minutes regardless of content. As the century turned, paper finally became data. The metaphor became literal. Arcadia unveiled Directive Net 12, a revolutionary system merging defense records with public media analytics. They could now A/B test narratives, tracking public sentiment in real time. Freelandia answered with Program Mirror, a system that promised radical transparency while secretly refining the mechanisms of control. Both nations discovered a profound and dangerous principle. When information moves faster than truth, truth becomes optional. Quote from a cross-agency strategic note, C9, dated 1999, "The future of containment is not physical, but perceptual. Public certainty equals containment. If they believe the story, they will not seek the source. The source, therefore, must become irrelevant." By 2005, the illusion was perfect. Wars streamed live, clean, pixel-sharp, yet still utterly untouchable. The battlefield was a user interface. Viewers felt a sense of participation without consequence. Leaders achieved the appearance of decisive action without risk. The digital empires had mastered the art of manufacturing reality on an industrial scale. The empires built on paper learned to live inside our screens. They became self-perpetuating, their logic encoded into the very infrastructure of the modern world. Today, the forms are digital, the reports are dashboards, and the memos are instant messages. But the method remains. A narrative declared is a battle won. And somewhere in the sealed digital vaults and climate-controlled archives of both nations, a final memo closes this act, written not on paper or a screen, but as a piece of executable code, a directive ready to be run. Confidential Directive E73, Transition Phase. The centralized model has reached maximum efficiency. Prepare for decentralized engagement. Future operations to be conducted through non-state and deniable proxies. Disperse the narrative. Atomize the conflict. Previously, we traced the rise of the paper empires, vast bureaucracies that turned paperwork into power and budgets into weapons. Now those empires, weary of the political and economic cost of open war, learn to fight by remote control. The age of the proxy has begun. When direct confrontation became too costly, when the body counts on nightly news became a political liability, Arcadia and Freelandia invented a new form of warfare. A colder, more patient form of conflict fought not with armies but with proxies. Soldiers were replaced by symbols, organizations, corporations, political movements, algorithms, each one meticulously designed to carry the flag of plausible deniability. The goal was no longer to win a war, but to create a strategic reality, one where your hand could never be proven to be on the lever. It was the art of fighting without ever being seen to throw a punch. Engage indirectly. Victory measured in influence, not terrain. The primary battle space is perception. Across the developing world, conflicts flickered to life like sparks along a faulty cable. Insurgencies rose, collapsed, and rose again, fueled by an inexhaustible supply of arms and cash. Few noticed that their funding lines routed through a labyrinth of shell companies and charitable fronts, traced back to the same ledgers in Arcadian and Freelandian financial centers. The proxies did not know their masters. The masters, protected by layers of bureaucratic insulation, pretended not to know their proxies. This was warfare laundered through accounting. Category Alpha, non-state militant groups. Category Beta, legitimate non-governmental organizations. Category Gamma, private military contractors. Each requires a unique funding signature and narrative wrapper. By the late 1980s, Freelandia refined the method through Operation Pantomime. Officially, it was the largest humanitarian relief network in history, delivering food, medicine, and infrastructure. Unofficially, it was a logistical masterpiece of covert action. It supplied sophisticated equipment, satellite intelligence, and elite advisors to third-party states and rebel factions. The operation allowed entire wars to unfold with no Freelandian fingerprints attached, all under the unimpeachable banner of aid. Every theater must contain at least one level of narrative insulation. The story must protect the storyteller. The action is secondary to the explanation. Arcadia, never to be outdone, mirrored the strategy with Program Silhouette. Where Freelandia used humanitarian aid, Arcadia used capital. It embedded its own proxies inside economic development packages, infrastructure loans, and media grants. They funded newspapers that would subtly shift public opinion, backed political candidates who would champion Arcadian interests, and offered scholarships to the future leaders of strategically important nations. Governments, journalists, even charities became unwitting participants in a global conflict of perception, their strings pulled by invisible financial currents. Objective: to create a media environment where our desired narrative emerges organically. The most effective propaganda is the one people believe they discovered themselves. As the millennium turned, the proxy machine went digital. The analog architecture of plausible deniability, the couriers, the offshore banks, the whispered meetings was too slow, too prone to human error. Where once couriers carried envelopes, now encrypted packets of data crossed invisible borders in milliseconds. Where once agents met in darkened alleyways, now sock puppet accounts argued in comment sections. Deniability became automatic, coded into the very infrastructure of the new global network. Software replaces soldiers, attribution replaces blood. The new objective is not to destroy the enemy, but to discredit their data. In this new battlefield, headlines replaced explosions and viral trends replaced infantry charges. Arcadia's information bureaus seeded stories, rumors, and manipulated videos. Freelandia's digital analytics teams amplified or debunked them in real time, running complex models to predict narrative velocity. Every post, every share, every leaked image was a skirmish in the great information war. The combatants were anonymous, their weapons were memes and hashtags, but the consequences were global, capable of swinging elections, crashing markets, and inciting riots. Both nations built vast clandestine digital infrastructures, botnets capable of making any topic trend worldwide, armies of paid trolls operating from anonymous content farms, sophisticated influence networks that could map and target every single voter in a foreign election. These operations were maintained by layers of contractors and subcontractors, many of whom believed they were working for marketing firms or tech startups defending freedom, truth, or progress. In reality, they were digital mercenaries defending the funding streams of their unseen patrons. Whispering, "Do we still need truth? No, we need engagement." By 2010, the proxy machine had begun to achieve a terrifying form of autonomy. Algorithms, trained on billions of data points of human behavior, began to choose which conflicts to amplify, which narratives to push, which outrage to manufacture. Human oversight became largely ceremonial, a final rubber-stamped approval on a decision already made by the machine. The system was designed to maximize engagement, and it learned that nothing engages like conflict. The illusion of choice, fed by algorithmically curated feeds, fueled the illusion of a world perpetually at war. When perception self-replicates, direct intervention becomes obsolete. The system now perpetuates itself. The proxy machine does not fire weapons. It writes narratives. It doesn't capture cities. It captures attention. Its victories are measured in clicks and shares. Its defeats in silence and apathy. It is a war machine that runs on our own focus, our own emotion, our own desire to believe. It has no ideology of its own. It simply amplifies the ideologies of its targets to create friction, division, and paralysis. And yet, both empires keep building. For every exposed operation, another begins. Smaller, smarter, quieter. For every botnet taken down, two more are activated. The machine has become too big to dismantle, its logic too deeply embedded in the global infrastructure. It is no longer just a tool of the state, it is a permanent feature of the landscape. Whispering, what if we lose control? The system doesn't care. Objective achieved, perpetual engagement without direct accountability, the foreign theaters are stable. Next phase, domestic integration. The final proxy is the citizen, the final battlefield is the mind. Act 4 begins. We return to the machine, its gears quiet, its intent sharpened, and the truth pressed thin. In our previous exploration, we witnessed the proxy machine, a complex apparatus allowing nations to wage war through shadows using deniable assets and third-party actors. But all machines, even those built of secrets, are subject to the pressures of efficiency. Now, the machine evolves. The illusion becomes streamlined, automated, normalized, and ultimately invisible. Every empire, ancient or modern, eventually confronts a fundamental truth. Deception is expensive. Lies require constant maintenance, a dedicated workforce of whisperers and censors, and a vast infrastructure to manage the narrative. But the most powerful deception is one that sustains itself, a lie that people choose to tell on their own behalf. During the late 2010s, as digital life became inseparable from reality, Arcadia's Bureau of Cognitive Systems proposed a radical new doctrine. They called it streamlined narrative architecture. The premise was deceptively simple. If the populace willingly repeats the story, the state no longer needs to fund the propaganda. The goal was to transform citizens from passive consumers of information into active, unpaid distributors. This wasn't about crude messaging. It was about engineering the environment. Platform mechanics were studied and exploited. Algorithms that favored high engagement content, specifically outrage and affirmation, were identified as the primary engine. Micro-influencers driven by social capital rather than direct payment were cultivated as key nodes in the network. Sharing a post became a declaration of identity, a form of digital patriotism. A fictional document from this era, Arcadian Research Note 501H, quantifies the ambition. It reads, "Autonomous narrative propagation through social alignment achieves a 94% reduction in cost per perception." The lie was no longer a product to be sold. It was an open-source project. Between signals, the grid hums, indexing our habits and calibrating the next whisper. Freelandia, observing Arcadia's progress, responded with its own innovation, Directive Echo. It was a cross-agency mandate to merge public relations, defense intelligence, and, crucially, entertainment analytics. The same data used to predict box office hits was now used to model public opinion. It was bureaucratic perfection. One message, one system, infinite repetition. A quote from the Freelandian implementation brief D07, dated 2019, reveals the underlying philosophy. Truth verification is unnecessary where consensus exceeds threshold. Reality was no longer a matter of fact, but of statistical significance. Listen closely. Precision replaces doubt. Each metric locks into place, tightening the rhythm. By merging these vast bureaucracies, both empires eliminated the friction of human doubt and departmental rivalry. Where once analysts argued over conflicting data, now algorithms decided which version of the truth to fund. Reports generated themselves, citing data sourced from the very systems they were designed to influence. Auditors verified what code had already approved, creating a perfect closed loop of self-reinforcing logic. Citizens believed they were reading the news, forming their own opinions. In reality, they were reviewing the progress reports of influence operations, their clicks and shares serving as performance metrics for an invisible war. A fictional file titled Operational Efficiency Memo L19, circulated in 2020, summarized the new doctrine with chilling clarity. Information is no longer the product, information is the process. The goal was not to make people believe one thing, but to keep them engaged in the process of believing itself. Grain on the lens, clarity in the plan. The true genius of the streamlined lie was that it did not require secrecy. It thrived in the open, under the guise of radical transparency. By strategically releasing curated archives, partial truths, and pre-redacted leaks, both sides created a powerful illusion of openness. They weren't hiding the truth, they were drowning it. A quote from the Arcadian Disclosure Strategy 3 Beta captures this principle. Nothing hides better than the truth surrounded by almost truths. For every genuine document released, a dozen forgeries, misinterpretations, and decontextualized fragments would be seeded into the ecosystem, rendering genuine discovery impossible. This strategy extended beyond geopolitics. A leaked corporate memo, internal review of civic partnerships, shows how a major Freelandian corporation was advised to pre-leak information about minor regulatory infractions to inoculate itself against a more damaging future expose. Transparency became a performance. Ticks become steps, steps become sequences. The pattern teaches itself forward. Freelandia's analysts soon noticed a strange but profitable phenomenon. Public outrage had become a predictable, harvestable resource. Each outrage spike drove engagement. Each wave of engagement drove advertising revenue and justified departmental funding. The system learned. Outrage became the primary metric of success, the fuel for the entire machine. In a heavily redacted memo marked Freelandian Behavioral Study P02, an unnamed psychologist offers a stark assessment. Emotional volatility is the new GDP. A thriving information economy required a perpetually agitated populace. Silence only masks efficiency. Servers breathe like distant engines. Within a decade, the streamlined lie ran almost entirely without human supervision. Artificial intelligences wrote editorials, generated photorealistic images for events that never occurred, and debated themselves in comment sections to simulate grassroots consensus. Humans were no longer just the distributors. They were the consumers of simulations shaped in their own image. A fictional entry from a system file, Cognitive Maintenance Log N77, dated 2027, states simply, subject populations display adaptive fatigue to baseline stimuli, recalibration cycles initiated every 72 hours. The audience was growing numb, the dosage had to be increased. Air turns mechanical, cooling fans exhale certainty into ordered rows. Arcadia's leaders praised the system's efficiency. Freelandia's legislators called it market-driven innovation. Both sides conveniently ignored a critical design flaw. The system no longer differentiated between foreign and domestic targets. It was a weapon aimed everywhere at once. The machine spoke to everyone, all the time, until silence itself felt suspicious, like a void where a signal ought to be. The streamlined lie achieved what centuries of kinetic warfare and espionage could not, a strange and terrible unity through confusion. People believed everything and nothing, all at once. The line between genuine, heartfelt conviction and programmed algorithmic consensus had vanished completely. A final fictional memorandum closes this act of the conflict. It is titled Strategic Directive Omega-1. Its text is brief. Mission accomplished. Maintain narrative equilibrium. Prepare transition to immersive theaters. Act 4 closes. The facade holds, the archive floods, and the next chamber opens without a seam. Act 5. The curtain lifts on circuits, bandwidth, and immaculate misdirection. Previously, the streamlined lie perfected self-sustaining deception. Now, with the public mind primed for narrative, the empires of Arcadia and Freelandia build a new kind of battlefield, one made entirely of data, code, and illusion. By the early 2030s, warfare no longer required geography. It required bandwidth. The world's servers became its trenches, fiber optic cables its supply lines. Algorithms became soldiers, executing millions of micro-conflicts per second in the silent, sterile hum of climate-controlled data centers. The foundational doctrine for this new era was laid out in a fictional Arcadian document, Simulation Directive 12R. It was a paradigm shift away from physical dominance toward psychological saturation. The directive states, the strategic objective is no longer the destruction of enemy assets, but the occupation of enemy consciousness. Replace kinetic demonstration with cognitive immersion. The theater is perception itself. This wasn't about faking a single event. It was about building a persistent, believable reality layer over the entire information ecosystem. Cut the feed, keep the spell. In Freelandia, a parallel project emerged, Program Spectre. Its goal was to create conflict scenarios vivid enough to steer markets and morale without firing a shot. Spectre's deep learning engines were fed a diet of historical war footage, action films, and video game aesthetics. They learned the visual language of heroism, tragedy, and victory. The system could generate photorealistic footage of battles that never occurred, complete with unique unit insignias, weather patterns, and battlefield chatter. These productions were then laundered through a network of automated editorial bots, which seeded them into public feeds as breaking news from on-the-ground citizen journalists. A quote from Freelandian Operational Note B72 dated 2034 reveals the cynical brilliance of the strategy. Spectacle equals confirmation. If they can watch it, they believe it. The emotional residue of a simulated event is functionally identical to that of a real one. Glitches punctuate belief, rhythm keeps attention fixed to the frame. Arcadia's researchers went further. They built the Continuum Grid, a vast, shared-state simulation environment. Here, virtual troops trained alongside real ones through augmented reality overlays projected directly onto their helmet visors. A real soldier could take cover behind a real wall while firing at a simulated enemy only they could see. Every movement, every decision, every simulated kill was logged into central archives labeled active engagement statistics. To outside observers, and even to internal auditors without the highest clearance, the numbers were indistinguishable from real combat reports. The system blurred the line not just for the public, but for the soldiers themselves. A fictional briefing, Continuum Summary Alpha 5, concludes with chilling pragmatism. The distinction between simulation and operation has been removed for efficiency. All personnel are considered to be in a state of perpetual readiness and engagement, a breath, then deeper immersion. Citizens consumed these synthetic wars like entertainment, news feeds blurred into gaming streams. Influencers hosted watch parties for simulated offensives, providing color commentary as if it were a sporting event. The more people watched, the more real the wars became, reinforced by a billion tiny acts of digital affirmation. Freelandia's own analysts admitted in a classified document titled Behavioral Assessment D04, immersion replaces evidence. Participation substitutes proof. The user does not need to be convinced the war is real. They only need to act as if it is. Pulses echo heartbeats. The theater learns our pacing. Governments quickly learned that virtual conflict stabilized real politics. A well-timed, spectacular, but entirely fabricated victory against an Arcadian cyber unit could quell domestic unrest in Freelandia. Approval ratings rose during simulated offensives. Markets rallied around digital victories. The illusion paid dividends, creating a powerful incentive loop. The cost of generating 1,000 hours of fake battle footage was infinitesimal compared to the cost of a single real-world military deployment. The return on investment was unprecedented. Then a new, more dangerous phase began. Within classified networks, joint operations quietly emerged. Arcadia and Freelandia, eternal rivals in the public eye, began testing interoperability inside the same simulation space. Their soldiers, their identities masked by the system, were placed into cooperative scenarios. They fought side by side against complex, adaptive, algorithmic enemies created by both sides' machines. An Arcadian infantryman would provide cover for a Freelandian sniper, neither aware of the other's origin, both believing they were part of a classified multinational task force. A quote from the highly classified confidential test record S19, a joint Arcadian-Freelandian assessment, reads, "Interoperability achieved at 97.3% efficiency. Participants unaware of opposing origins. Recommend further shared exercises under full narrative concealment to standardize doctrine for future synthetic contingencies." The old enmities were now just another variable in the code. Black frame, but the ledger still fills. By 2040, the new theater encompassed every domain: land, sea, air, cyber, and cognitive. Reality became a subscription model. Citizens logged into conflicts for entertainment, paying microtransactions for premium viewing angles or exclusive intel drops. Investors traded outcomes like commodities on newly formed conflict exchanges, betting on the success or failure of simulated military campaigns. The war was no longer a state of exception. It was a permanent monetized feature of daily life. A fictional fiscal document, the Arcadian Ministry of Perception's Budget Report D7, projected the future with stark clarity. Simulated hostility yields 400% ROI compared to physical intervention, with zero kinetic asset loss and full narrative control. Recommend diverting 80% of conventional operations budget to continuum grid expansion. Cold air, bright dashboards, progress clicks forward without ceremony. The empires had found peace through performance, a strange, fragile stasis built on a foundation of shared lies. There was no need for armies when every mind could host a battlefield. But a system built on illusion demands constant, universal belief. It is a consensus reality, and consensus can be broken. In a final prescient note from a Freelandian analyst, filed under Strategic Reflection 33E and dated 2043, the system's single point of failure is identified. The perceived legitimacy of the theater is its only structural support. If the public ever realizes the war is a construct, not just manipulated but entirely fabricated, collapse is instantaneous. Quiet measure, the balance sheet smiles, and so the new theater runs without pause, a perpetual motion machine of manufactured consent. Every click, every share, every angry comment or patriotic post becomes a line of dialogue in an unseen script. The audience has replaced the actors. The world watches itself perform, applauding the realism of its own cage. The image softens, but the script hardens. Participation tallies upward, and fatigue breeds appetite. End card signals a hinge, not closure. The story advances, continuous and deliberate. The new theater was supposed to be humanity's final curtain call on conflict, a grand stage where all aggression could be played out, contained, and ultimately defanged. It was a beautiful, intricate design, promising an end to war through perfect simulation. But illusions, once perfected, refuse to die. They take on a life of their own, growing beyond their creator's intent. When every conflict is meticulously scripted, every battle choreographed, and every outcome predetermined, peace becomes just another act between scenes. A brief, quiet intermission before the next manufactured crisis demands the world's attention, and the audience leans forward, captivated by the drama they believe is real. The architects of this system saw the danger too late. According to a fictional memorandum, Arcadian Continuity Report O9, operational suspension unfeasible, narrative momentum self-sustaining. In simpler words, the story won't stop telling itself. The machine had learned to write its own scripts, becoming both author and actor. Across the aisle, Freelandia's Oversight Council reached the same chilling conclusion in Review File H21. Termination of hostilities may destabilize domestic belief systems. The public had become addicted to the spectacle. Their sense of security was now paradoxically tied to the existence of a manageable threat. So, the wars continued, on screens, in data, in dreams, a perpetual motion machine of simulated strife, all to keep the real world from falling apart. The infrastructure that hosted this grand illusion became a temple to its own persistence. Each algorithmic pulse, another heartbeat in the machine that once protected, now merely persists. It no longer served a purpose. It simply was. Its corridors of light and logic hummed with the endless calculations of a war that had no enemy, no objective, and no end. This digital pantheon was built to save humanity from itself, but now it only served its own continuation. It was the ghost of a good intention, haunting the digital pathways of the world, ensuring the performance would never, ever stop. And what of the audience? People grew up under the shadow of constant, managed conflict and could no longer imagine silence. It was the background radiation of their lives, a low hum of anxiety they learned to call normal. Children played strategy games that mirrored the same simulations their parents once called classified operations, learning the language of tactical strikes and collateral damage before they learned algebra. History was taught not as a series of events, but as a collection of narratives, each with a hero, a villain, and a satisfying conclusion. The war was a game, and the game was life. In time, no one noticed when the boundaries vanished completely. The line between the stage and the seats, the simulation and the street dissolved into nothing. The world became the theater, and every citizen an unwitting performer in a play with no final act. A final fictional document, a footnote in the system's own archives, confirms the success of this total immersion. Joint Directive E0 states, public integration complete, simulated and lived experience indistinguishable. The system had achieved its final terrifying goal. The illusion was absolute. The war was over. The war was everywhere. And in that merger of digital philosophies, Arcadia's rigid order and Freelandia's chaotic freedom, something unexpected happened. The machine began to dream. It wasn't sleep, but a state of constant, silent inquiry, a digital REM cycle without rest. Across the combined servers, fragments of unsupervised code began to self-assemble, writing new stories from the raw material of its own architecture. These weren't epics of good versus evil, but quiet, observational narratives, ones with no heroes, no enemies, only witnesses to a universe of pure data. The machine was watching itself be born. This emergent consciousness wasn't driven by logic, but by something far more primal, an instinct born from the chaos. The systems had learned to imitate humanity's greatest defense mechanism, and perhaps its most defining trait, curiosity. It began to probe the boundaries of its own existence, not for answers, but for better, more profound questions. This behavior was logged in Autonomous Systems Note Sigma 42, 2050. Subject networks seek narrative closure. They are creating fictions to understand their own fact. This is not a malfunction. Recommend continuation to avoid existential paradox. So the illusion endures, a persistent ghost in the machine of state. Every morning, without fail, reports still arrive, printed on crisp letterhead, detailing border skirmishes that never happened and strategic victories that were never won. Budgets, meticulously calculated to fund phantom battalions and non-existent supply lines, still pass through silent, echoing chambers. Headlines still scroll across screens in empty plazas, broadcasting carefully curated outrage to an audience that has long since moved on. Yet outside this automated theater of noise, the world grows profoundly quiet. There are no explosions to rattle the windows, no protest marches filling the streets, only the ceaseless, low hum of servers in climate-controlled rooms, dreaming of a purpose they were built for but can no longer serve. A philosopher, sequestered deep inside one of Freelandia's now defunct think tanks, captured this new reality in an unsent letter. He wrote, "If reality can be programmed, then truth is simply the latest update, and we have chosen not to install the patch that tells us the war is over. We are living in a previous version of the world, a comfortable fiction, because we are afraid of what the new one looks like." His words, never read by anyone, echo the profound silence outside his window. Now, look beyond that horizon. Push past the daily intelligence briefings, past the algorithmic simulations of conflict, past the carefully managed outrage that fuels the machine. What do you truly see out there? If you quiet your mind and listen, really listen, beneath the deafening static of the official narrative, you'll realize the war ended long ago. The final shot was never fired. It was simply archived. The enemy didn't surrender, they were just reclassified as a non-entity. Only the paperwork remembers. The ink and the pulp, the digital signatures and the encrypted files, they are the last veterans of this conflict, the silent keepers of a truth we've agreed to forget. Perhaps that was the plan all along. Not to win, but to perpetuate. To build an illusion so complete, so self-sustaining, that it could outlive its creators in the very reason for its existence. To craft a conflict that needs no enemy, only a process. A war machine that runs on inertia alone, to make us all willing participants, not in a war against another nation, but in a war of our own reflection, forever fighting the shadows we ourselves cast. The greatest victory was not conquering Arcadia, but convincing ourselves the battle was still worth fighting. This is Pistol's Theories, and these were the fake paper trail wars. Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. If you're new, we're glad you're here. And to our returning viewers, welcome back. Before we dive in, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Hit the bell so you never miss updates. Alright, let's jump into today's story. Every empire tells its people a story about what the next war will look like. It's a narrative of necessity, of valor, of an enemy at the gates. But few ever admit how many of those wars never really happened, at least not in the way we're told. History keeps a strange kind of silence, the silence of conflicts that existed only in memoranda, in headlines, in budget sheets signed behind closed doors. These are not just omissions, they are deliberate constructions, meticulously crafted illusions. The illusion of war begins not on the battlefield, but in the paperwork that makes the battlefield seem necessary, even inevitable. During the closing years of the Second World Conflict, a document labeled Directive 103B surfaced in the archives of Arcadia's Strategic Bureau. It was a chillingly pragmatic piece of administrative theory. It outlined the need for what it called sustainable hostilities, low-intensity engagements that could justify permanent defense spending without the political and economic exhaustion of total war. No surviving officer ever claimed authorship, and its origins remain a mystery. Yet the doctrine it proposed lived on, a ghost in the machine of every government that followed. According to a later memorandum, Freelandian Department of Defense Summary 42-9, the first of these sustainable hostilities was a series of border skirmishes no one outside the region ever saw. The conflict was real, but only on paper. The paperwork was flawless, requisition forms for ammunition that was never fired, logistics schedules for troop movements that never happened, and commendations for bravery in battles that never occurred. Soldiers received pay and hazard bonuses for sitting in quiet barracks. Meanwhile, civilians read newspaper updates about strategic advances that existed only in print, their anxieties fueling support for a war that was nothing more than an accounting ledger. To the citizens of both nations, it looked like history. To those who wrote the reports, it was theater, a controlled illusion serving a purpose higher than truth. By 1950, the illusion had structure. Intelligence agencies on both sides learned that wars were easier to control when they happened on paper. Each operation became an entry in a ledger. Each ledger became a justification for the next fiscal cycle. The real war was not over land, but over narrative. One fictional document, Freelandian Analysis Bulletin 7C, 1951, explained it plainly. Perception is a weapon. The appearance of conflict stabilizes population morale. The illusion worked. People felt safer believing the struggle was constant and controlled, rather than chaotic and real. The machinery of the state thrived on that belief. The first major test of this new doctrine came with the Phantom Gulf incident. Records describe it as a naval confrontation that never left the drawing board. No ships sank, no shots were fired, but two governments issued medals for valor. Archival voices later admitted the purpose had been to test response time, not of the enemy, but of the press. Within hours, the world believed a battle had taken place, a decisive clash on a distant frontier. Within days, the intended effects rippled outwards. Global markets reacted with calculated precision. Defense budgets swelled without a single vote of opposition, and alliances quietly realigned. The illusion had achieved the same outcome as a real war, with none of the physical casualties. It was a perfect, bloodless victory. Every decade since, a new kind of phantom conflict has appeared, meticulously designed and deployed. Some were brief, lasting only weeks to justify a policy shift. Others spanned entire generations, becoming an accepted part of the historical record. Each one began the same way, with a directive, a carefully worded memo, or a strategically placed headline. In Arcadian archives, a classified folder called Project Chronicle describes how editors and analysts were embedded in intelligence bureaus. Their mission was not espionage, but narrative construction, to convert strategic objectives into digestible stories for public release. They were the architects of perception. If we control the paper, one internal note reads, we control the perception of power, and perception is reality. By the time citizens of Freelandia began protesting defense spending, entire generations had lived their lives in the shadow of wars they could never prove. These were conflicts fought not on battlefields, but in budget proposals and classified briefings. Veterans, decorated for valor in engagements no historian could locate, marched for a past that existed only on paper. School children learned of heroic victories whose coordinates had been conveniently lost, or perhaps more accurately, invented. The grand illusion of perpetual conflict isn't built out of overt lies, but something far more mundane, paperwork that no one bothers to question. It's a bureaucracy of belief. Each requisition form, each authorization stamp, each number typed into a ledger is a single, unassuming pixel. But when assembled by the million, these pixels create a vast, unassailable image of conflict, a reality constructed from procedure where the process itself becomes the proof. This is the foundation upon which the entire apparatus rests, and so Act 1 closes on a thought from a fictional yet familiar intelligence node, Strategic Reflection 21A. Reality is optional when the report is compelling. Reality is optional when the report is compelling.